where human, by human, we refer to this form,
Flesh and
this
blood,
name and
yeah.
form, right? That's where the being aspect comes. So you say human being.
Right.
The being, we are mostly stuck with the human experience, and hence the being is stuck with this human form. Now, if you detach it by spiritual and religious processes that gets you beyond the boundary of being human, then you are more being, and that is spiritual. Right now, that is not there in most people's experience because they don't aspire for it.
Hi, and welcome to Nothing is Rocket Science, a podcast where we talk about everything science and scientific. However, in today's episode, we are going to take a slight diversion. We're going to shift to another realm, like, a spiritual realm. But also, we're going to talk about the science behind, the spirituality. And when I was thinking about this topic, I couldn't, think of a better person that I can talk to, at least in my circles, who would be, willing to have a robust conversation and answer some of the, sensitive questions, probably. So, so today we have with us Mr. Adi Narayanan. He is the founder of Anadi Foundation, which is a social and a spiritual organization. He's also a TED speaker and an adjunct professor of practice at IIT Delhi, and where he teaches courses on inner development, yogic neuroscience, cognition, and related areas. He is also an engineer, and he has a master's in computer engineering from North Carolina State University. And he's also worked in the software industry briefly, I'm sorry. He was also in academia for a decade before starting the foundation. A deeply spiritual experience when he was in US, which he later came to know as a state of samadhi, motivated him to return to India and dedicate his life to the well-being of all. Besides this, he also does Mauna Sadhana, which is silence in isolation. And he's done that for over 200 days with a duration of 30 to 40 days in one go. So I'm really excited to have some of the questions answered. And welcome to today's episode, Aditi.
Thank you, Sandhya. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I look forward to the discussion.
Yeah. So before I go on to my first question, we go back, a long time, but you know that I'm addicted to science, like rational evidence. And I often joke that this is an occupational hazard for those in the field of research. But I also often find myself drawn towards spirituality and its unknown, because I want to understand and find answers to questions that science couldn't answer or hasn't answered so far. So that kind of I'm kind of caught in a limbo between this. So I thought my first question would be: is it science versus spirituality, or is it science and spirituality?
So this is a question that is very apt for the times. And this is in the heads of so many young people who wish to ride both, science and spirituality. So in that sense, it is science and spirituality, because everyone wants to ride both. Okay. So, people might shy away because of popular aspects. But otherwise, if we see young people, many people that I have interacted with, tens of thousands of young people, want to ride both. It's so science versus spirituality could have been in the past, but I think going forward, it's science and spirituality, and that's where spirituality now. Many people have started looking at it in terms of evidence-based metrics, where nobody wants to leave out the science aspect because everyone is trained in science. So that way, I would call it science and spirituality.
Fine, science and spirituality. Okay. What about spirituality and religiousness, or like religion? How are they different? Is one better than the other?
So if we look at the nature of spiritual experience, So when I had a deeply spiritual experience, now what is meant by spiritual? We can broadly look at it as that which is non-material or intangible. So we have tangible, this is, for example, a very tangible experience. So this, we would not look at it as a spiritual interaction or a spiritual experience, right? Because this is very much tangible, very much you're there, I'm here, it's very clear. So that we look at it as based on sensory experience or sensory evidence. Now, what we call as spiritual is intangible in that sense. So non-physical, non-material, intangible, and hence it's been looked at as that which is unknown, or nobody knows what's there, or vague, uncertain. Such aspects have been linked with the spiritual domain. But in essence, it's just intangible. It's like, for example, you can say the science of cosmology. It's, we are limited by the view of the, sky as a dome. We are not able to penetrate deeper. And there we use for reaching out into the stars, our knowledge, right? So that's where when we, when I had a deep spiritual experience, later I had to refer to what is called religious literature, that comes in with the tag of religious literature. So that's where I found evidence of what my experience has been. So in that sense, if we look at religion, we can say that it's more the organized spiritual part. So spiritual, when we attach tags like unknown, uncertain, mysterious, and so on, these can be grouped as unorganized or freely organized. While religion is more linked with organized, experience. Or that's why religion, if we look at the root word, religare or religieux, these mean one is to bind or to connect or to unite. So unite the man with the divine, or bind in terms of certain practices, certain, within a certain cultural milieu, if you may say so. And those become practice oriented that leads to a deeper experience. So, if we look at this, then we are not looking at religion versus spirituality. So you can say spirituality is unorganized religion, and religion is organized spirituality. That is the sense that I'm trying to make here.
So does that mean that religion kind of offers proof for what is unknown, and that spirituality cannot explain? It's more like an experience, whereas religion offers proof or evidence that yes, what you experienced is true or false.
Yeah, that's a very good direction that you're leading the discussion into. I really appreciate that. So when we talk of proof, we are talking of a corpus of knowledge that so many people have experienced, that goes into that corpus that defines the proof. So it is not unlike science. Science is dependent on a corpus of knowledge.
Correct.
So if you need to publish any work, research work, you need to refer to that corpus of knowledge. You cannot publish without having references or citations. So in that sense, there is religious literature that is used as a corpus of knowledge to situate your experience, your spiritual experience. So that was a very good question.
That brings me to the next question of, I think I'm also guilty of this, or I've also used this in certain, instances. When people say that I am not religious, but I'm spiritual, what do you think it actually means when they say that? I know most of us probably use it without understanding the meaning of it, but what it actually means.
Yeah, so I've also heard quite a lot of people use the term, I am not just I'm spiritual but not religious, but the other way around. I'm religious but not spiritual. Okay, that also I have heard. For example, many elders, that I've interacted with, they would call themselves religious, but not exactly spiritual. Now, many young people would call themselves, spiritual, but not religious. So that's very interesting to look at. So as you grow, older, more organized forms become more appealing. As you are younger, you like to explore. You need to, for example, many people now travel quite a bit. Young people. So before settling down into a routine job, or see earlier with the previous generations, people used to aspire for brick and mortar, bungalow, or house, car, all physical assets, land, gold, for example. Now the younger generations are looking at more like travel, experience, more exploration that expands the scope, of what they define as life.
Correct.
There is a thirst to experience life to its fullest. So the younger generation, we are looking at spiritual but not religious. If I were to rephrase it, I read religion as organized spirituality. I read spirituality as unorganized religion. So that way, the youth definitely look at free-flowing exploration, and that is quite okay. And that is not there just in spiritual experience or religion. It is there everywhere, even in terms of unorganized work. People like to explore so many things, multitask, do this, that. So many identities young people like to have before they settle into one identity, which at an early career, they might look at it as boring.
Okay, so it's part of adulting, you're saying.
Or growing old.
Growing old. Okay. Yeah, that's a very interesting aspect to look at. So where do you think science fits into this? Where do you think science meets or intersects spirituality or religion?
Yeah. When we get trained in science, we are looking at some key tag words, if you can say, some tags associated with science. So one is definitely evidence, as you have already mentioned. Another is a corpus of knowledge, which we have discussed. So what we refer to as science is basically a corpus of knowledge. So everything is a product of science in that sense, right? This even this interaction, this video conferencing facility is a product of science. This home is a product of science, the construction. Everything that we can look around, we look at it in the view, in the lens of science. So there we are referring to a corpus of knowledge. But if we add a few more tags here, that would be very illustrative. So one is measurement. In science, we always look at how to measure, right? Whatever we need, how do we measure it? Yeah. So it's not ad hoc measurement. So there is agreed upon, in the peer groups, it's agreed upon, what measurements are valid. So there is a range which is defined and agreed upon, which we call, okay, this is valid measurement. For example, a kilometer is defined like that. A second is defined like that. So space, time, all of these are agreed upon measures in that sense, which is relatable by observation, right? So measurement is a key tag when we that we associate with science, and we associate with evidence. And there is a methodology to this process of measuring and evidence collection, right? And then interpretation, building up hypothesis, and then theorizing.
Right.
So this, if we look at it as a process, this is not, this is not the scope that it offers, that scientific process offers is huge, which can be applied to what are called uncertain or unknown or non-measurable aspects, which might not yet be measurable, which are not yet within the domain of measurement or reliable measurement, or attaching reliable metrics to it. It does not include, for example, science has not said the last word, that this is it, the whole universe is known. That's it, there's nothing further. Science has not said the last word, and that gives a lot of exciting scope. So now we have so many exciting areas coming up in sciences, which were earlier would have been like, would have been vague or unknown or unclear at best. You have omics technologies, nanosciences, quantum sciences,
right.
and so on. So those are very exciting areas.
Correct. I tried, like, I feel like sometimes, when you cannot find answers to these tangible things, like sometimes quantum physics tries to answer the unknown, but again, like you rightly said, there's a lot we still don't know. And okay, so when I was doing some research for this talk, I came across this book which I just started reading. It's called Spiritual Science by Steve Taylor, in case anyone wants to give it a read. And I came across this sentence, which I'm going to quote verbatim. It says, science interprets the world in a rational way, and religion an irrational way. However, spiritual science transcends both conventional science and religion and answers many of the riddles that neither can explain. So what do you think? Do you agree with this? Or do you think spiritual science kind of transcends both these extremes or different schools of thought?
Okay, this is a nice way of putting it, because trying to use logic, we need some words to work with. So that way, it's very nicely put. But if I were to draw it up as a spectrum, okay, so not this versus that, but I will put everything together into one spectrum, like the electromagnetic spectrum, right?
Correct.
So you have science, you have religion, you have spiritual sciences. All these, let's assume it in one spectrum. When I say a spectrum need not be linear. It can be non-linear and multidimensional. So that adds a lot of complexity, maybe difficult to imagine at first go. But still, let's stay with it here. So if we look at science, earlier, let's say, for example, classical physics, it was more in terms of deterministic, linear. You could associate these with such tags. Now, if you look at sciences, they have adopted principles like non-linearity, emergence, then non-deterministic, and so on. So these are principles of what is called complexity science. And if we link it with experience, religious experience, now religion, the kind of experiences that you read about in religious literature all over the world, not just when I say religious literature, I'm not limiting myself to just some commandments or rules and so on. I'm looking at the nature of religious experience. Now, to be able to break down an experience into just a few terms and logic is quite daunting. It's quite difficult, I would say, because imagine we would have studied in physics. This body, let's say, this body is made up of cells. Cells are made up of molecules. Molecules are made up of atoms. Subatomic particles. Then you have muons, bosons, leptons. You have quarks. Then you have particle wave duality. In all this, there have been very intelligent people who have asked this question: hey, where am I in all this? Right. So that seems to be a very deep question, because we have studied so much, which has been evidence-based, But where am I in all this? And hence experience, when we look at experience, it's non-trivial to fit it into a rational logic. And hence it has been looked at as irrational. But if we just hold on for a minute, what we call as irrational, now with the advent of modern rationality, we are talking of things like big data, which earlier would have been irrational at best. Even now, big data analysis, AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, all these do not fit into the rational framework of, strictly rational framework of science. These are like fuzzy zones. Yeah, now they have become popular and hence widely acceptable by many people. But these are strictly, they don't fit into the strict rational definitions of science. If we think about it. So that way, big data now helps us see patterns where earlier that was not there, if we can say that. So correct. That's the difference between deterministic, non-deterministic, and so on. Deterministic means we would expect it to be strictly rational. Non-deterministic means it's irrational, right? Yeah. But these are not irrational. That's where modern sciences have actually started working along these directions, where experience and the sciences have not touched yet. For example, a human experience, right? Now we are having a lived experience. We are having a living experience. Now science cannot fully capture it, maybe, but we are heading there.
So it's like the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence.
Yeah, that's very well said.
Yeah. Do you also I think one example that comes to my mind for what you just said is, the gravitational waves. I think Einstein, came up with that long time back, but we just didn't have maybe the means. He saw it, but I think it was recently proved, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So science is still evolving, and we don't have the advanced equipment or the technology to see what's out there. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where, to collect evidence, we need more and more refined instruments. When I say instruments, these are not just physical instruments, even intellectual instruments like mathematics or computation or algorithms. All these are instrumentations that are important for us to be able to perceive that which is beyond perception. For example, I see the sun rising in the east, but is that the whole of rational science? Science tells me that the sun does not rise or set. It is I who am rotating along with the earth. But that's not there in my evidence. If I collect my evidence based on my sensory data, I could be quite far away from what is happening actually.
Oh yeah. Whatever you've learned so far wouldn't make sense, right? Like if you think delve deeper into all this, correct? Coming to my next question. So I think it kind of answers my next question. It says that can spirituality and science coexist? And I think the answer is yes.
Definitely yes. In fact, there is the way forward. And when I also mention the word spiritual, I'm also referring to values here. For example, even religion has what is called values. Now, science, does it have values? That is a big question. So science, we talk of professional ethics or professional values or scientific values and so on, integrity and so on. But there are things like basic human values. The world requires peace. Now, peace as a value is not associated with science, but it's associated with religion and spirituality. So we definitely need those values to wrap around science to make it whole. So that's why I mentioned it. I would look at it as a spectrum where science, religion, spiritual, everything coexists in that spectrum.
So if a normal person has to understand this, how would you Like, okay, where do I tap into all these three in the spectrum, and how do I do it? Like, when do I do it?
If what is meant by a normal person, if we understand it, let me use a framework here that is quite popular in the yogic literature. Okay, in the science of yoga, it's quite popular. We use something called panchakosha. Panchakosha means 5 components of a human system. Not just a human system. We are not limiting here to a human system. We can analyze various living systems with this panchakosha model. So, of which one component is annamaya kosha. Annamaya is made up of that which is made up of food. So a human, when we say a human being, one important component is that which is made up of food, the food that we eat. That is the body.
Right.
If you take a tree, for example, there is that physical part which is made up of food. So food is an abstraction. A layer of food is an abstraction to denote any living system. So even a fly, there's a part made up of food. It has food, and that part is made up of food. So it is like a multi-component architecture. It's a composite architecture. So one component is made up of food, that is called the annamaya kosha. Another component is made up of energy, or what we call prana. So pranamaya kosha. Another component is made up of feelings and the sensory data being processed. That is the manomaya kosha, or what we can broadly call the mind. Then you have the vijnanamaya kosha, which is the component which is to do with processing of the cognitive aspects, the knowledge components, the structure of knowledge. And then you have the anandamaya kosha, which is the core aspect which is to do with the experience of satisfaction, of fulfillment, of ananda.
Bliss.
Bliss, we can say. So this is a multi-component architecture, or a composite. So a human system is looked at as a composite of such components. There are various ways to look at it, but this is one powerful way of looking at it, which easily lends itself to intellectual discussions, because you have a framework to reason out. Hopefully this is called pancha. Pancha means 5. Kosha means components, so or parts. So 5 component architecture. Okay. Sorry. What was the context of the question?
Yeah, so it was, so we have the spectrum where we have science, we have spirituality, and then we have religion. So how do we know what to tap into and when?
So in the context of a normal person, so any person has these 5 components. Now, how comfortable one is in any of these components, that defines their experience in that, at that level. For example, if one is in pain, then at the physical level, then one's that aspect is not fully flowing smoothly. Or one is in deep energy, depletion. One is tired, worn out, or one is experiencing unpleasantness, emotional trauma, where relationships are not working out, or one is not enjoying what one is doing. So that is the manomaya kosha. So at each level, when we are looking at a normal person's experience, we are talking of at one of these levels, either the physical, or the manomaya kosha, or you have the vijnanamaya kosha. We would identify ourselves as, oh, I'm bright, I'm intelligent. Oh, I'm not so bright, I'm stupid. So these all are the experiences of what we call a normal person. A normal person either sometimes is feeling healthy or not so healthy, is sometimes feeling happy or not so happy, is sometimes feeling clear-headed, intellectually clear, or sometimes confused. So these are the normal range of experiences that are there for everybody. Now, what we call as spiritual is deeper than this, deeper than the panchakosha, where we need to take a step back And we can easily do that. For example, we can easily look at the body and feel, okay, it pains here. Now, generally, we are so identified with it that we are not able to extricate ourselves from it. And we feel down. Or we are so identified with emotional pain that our life is like moving from one trauma to another.
Right.
Interspersed with some happiness, okay. And that's more like a relief. It's not so much happiness. Many children would experience happiness, but as we age, it's more like relief. Okay, at least now things are going, for the time being, it's somehow going fine. Let's say you are in a research career. One day it's bright, another day it's not. What's happening, so there are ups and downs. So this is what we call as a normal person's experience. Okay. So what we look at as spiritual experience is still not within this range of normal experience. Why? Because nobody aspires for it. Sometimes we get a glimpse of, maybe I'm missing out on something in my life. But very soon we fill ourselves up with so many diverse kinds of things like, food, entertainment, music, or, intellectual activity, reading something, or relationships. We try to overstuff our lives where there is no gap to be able to perceive the deep spiritual aspect that we are. So this is a normal person's experience. So, and that is linked with one's own aspiration. And aspiration is to do with one's exposure. So we are exposed to modern day science, where our aspirations are more in terms of science, career, growth, and so on. It is not so much in terms of spiritual experience, exploring the spirit, the intangible, so to speak. So that might give a context.
Right. Yeah. No, that's an interesting analogy. And can you tell us? I know I'm going slightly. I mean, sticking to the same concept, but like to a different meanings of a few words that kind of related to this. Can you tell us about the concept of soul or energy? And are they both the same? Like, how if you have to talk about soul, how do you explain that in simple words, like to a normal person?
Okay. So that's where as we looked at the Panchakosha, because these things, if just looking at them as intangible, does not help explain anything to ourselves. So that's the reason why we are using intellectual frameworks to play with it. Okay. But when we talk of the spiritual, it's always beyond the intellectual framework. But that notwithstanding, one can still gain, use these frameworks to reason out and navigate to a spiritual experience. So the Panchakosha, as we have seen, 5 components where, physical, the Annamaya Kosha, that which is made up of food, Pranamaya, Manomaya, or the feelings and mind, the Vijnanamaya, or the intellectual aspects, knowledge, and the Anandamaya, or the feeling of bliss. So what we call the soul, or in Indian terms, in Indian spiritual and religious literature, there is this term called Atman. The Atman is looked at in terms of that which is beyond these koshas. So that is a very useful definition or technical aspect to bear in mind. So when we are discussing the nature of our experience, we are still talking within this range of the Panchakoshas. But what we refer to as the soul or the Atman, I'm now making a hazardous equation where I'm relating soul with Atman. Okay. For many, it might not be acceptable. But still, for the sake of ease of grasping for many young people who are looking at more in terms of the the spirit of the discussion than the exact letters and words used. I'm just hazarding this. So let me use the term Atman. That is easy to work with because it has a technical definition. So an Atman is defined as that which is beyond the Panchakoshas. Okay. And it is something that, so the Panchakosha is looked at as a conglomeration or an aggregation. So for example, the physical body is an aggregate of food that is taken from outside, and hence after a point in time, it just goes back to its basic components, right? It comes together. There's something binding it together, and then it goes back after its due time. It goes back. Likewise, the pranamaya kosha, it comes together and then is dispersed after its due time. Likewise, the manomaya kosha, where feelings, even the vijnanamaya kosha, the knowledge, we gather it from everywhere, but after some time, it's just dissipated. It's gone. So we are talking of a process of aggregation and then disaggregation. Atman is something that is not touched by this. It is not an aggregate of anything. So it is defined as the simplest substratum on which all of this happens. And that is who we are.
Okay, so that's where the intuition comes from. It kind of knows everything. It's not rational, but it is still.
It's still so when we talk of rationality, for example, we cannot prove that I exist. For example, I cannot prove to you that I exist. Right?
Well, I think this video is a proof that you exist.
Within a relative frame of reference, we are talking quantum physics here.
Right. Yeah, I was definitely that was my next question, basically. So what's Atman? And there's also another word called Brahman, right? So what is that? Like, what is?
Yeah. So technically, we have looked at Atman as that which is not an aggregate, and hence it cannot be disaggregated. And hence it is like a the most fundamental aspect on which everything else is superimposed or overlaid to build up this infrastructure, right? If we look at it as a composite infrastructure. So this Atman is literally, if we can look at it, it is literally that which cannot be divided, and hence that which cannot be aggregated upon. So not open to aggregation and disaggregation, while everything else in our living experience is open to aggregation and disaggregation. For example, viewing this discussion will actually, it's like aggregation. An intellectual process is aggregation and disaggregation. We use that. A scientific process is, aggregation, consolidation, disaggregation, and moving forward. So, in that sense, Atman is something that is not, touched by this. Now, Brahman is defined as that which is literally vast, and hence undefinable, or not open to definition, not open to vastness itself. And it is not just space. It is that which does not come under the purview of definition, because definition by nature is that which is open to aggregation of ideas. So if you define something, you're living out something else. So Brahman is that which is all-inclusive and hence and also transcendent. It is not touched by these definitions or lack of definitions and so on. So that is considered the principle of divinity or God. So God principle is defined as that. So that is called nirguna. Nirguna means that which does not have qualifications or qualities.
Right.
While the that does not limit it from engaging with relative frames of reference, which is saguna. So saguna is with qualities, with qualifications, and very interestingly, we can actually correlate it with our own experience here. If you look at it, you hold yourself still, you'll see as you go deeper and deeper and deeper, initially you're this body, then you go deeper, the body becomes an object in your awareness. Then you're aware of your mind, and the mind is an object in your awareness. It's like you have feelings, sometimes you feel great, sometimes you feel low, and hence it's an object of observation. And as you go deeper, you'll see you transcend what you call you. Your limited identities, you transcend. And hence you have that transcendent aspect to you, which is what is called nirguna. While the immanent, you also call yourselves, hey, I'm Adinarayan, or I'm Sandhya. And that is the immanent aspect. So both, this is Saguna, there is Nirguna, and both at the same time. So it does not contradict, it's not mutually contradictory. And that is the great idea, where we are both the undefinable and yet the very much definable, and this in flesh and blood, and this personality, and both are non-contradictory. And that is the range of spectrum that we are talking about. That's full spectrum.
Okay. Yeah. There was a question that I wanted to ask you in the end. It's the very quintessential question of who am I? I guess this is probably an answer to that.
Yeah, the full spectrum. And hence, if we define ourselves too specifically, then we are burdened with that definition. Many people, since they are not exposed to the spiritual aspects, or the religious literature, because there's a lot of opinions around it. If we just keep away the opinions, the religious experience or the spiritual aspects are pretty good. They apply to each one of us at our own, experiential levels. So if we just define ourselves as, hey, I'm this career person, I'm a researcher, I'm studying for this, I'm a PhD scholar, I am a scientist, I'm a corporate honcho. All these definitions actually cause a lot of stress. So many people are not able to switch off these definitions of themselves.
Right.
And they go on vacations trying to, just forget these definitions at least for some time. But, it just comes along. So that's where just one aspect, one end of the spectrum would not do. We need to go to the other end of the spectrum as well, which is the defineless aspect, which is like undefined. One, looking at oneself as that undefined, Atman or Brahman. And then the circle is complete, not otherwise.
Okay, so if you have to, from what we discussed right now, so it feels like Atman is more like energy because it is neither created nor destroyed. It cannot be altered. So it's part of, so if I look at a human, does the human have both Atman and Brahman in them? Or is like Brahman is like God and Atman is the human in simple words?
Okay. So this is a challenge with using logic in a very limited sense. So if we had to give a rough analogy, now this laptop or mobile phone here uses electrical energy. Now the fan here also uses electrical energy. There's light, bulb here uses electrical energy. The expressions of these are very different, but they all use the same electrical energy. Now, energy, when we look at it, this is manifest energy. Okay, so the electricity, is it created? Yes, it is created somewhere. It's generated. There is a electrical generation facility that is like generating electricity. Now, that is the manifest aspect of, let's say, electrical energy, where you can play with it, you can work with it, and so on. But when we refer to the Brahman, we don't look at it as manifest. We don't look at terms like manifest or unmanifest. We go beyond those terminologies. So it is going beyond. When I say it is undefined, it is not like not defined or defined, not defined. It does not come within that spectrum. It
Mm.
is, that's what is called transcendent. So in that sense, it's a God principle. So in Tamil, we call it Paramporul. Paramporul means the fundamental principle, which we are, it is, through discussions, we start moving towards it, more in terms of negating what all definitions we carry, because it's beyond those definitions.
Mm.
So we are not looking at it just like energy. That's why I use the analogy of electrical energy. That electrical energy is manifest. You can talk of it as manifest, unmanifest, but Brahman, we don't look at it as manifest, unmanifest. It is beyond that.
Okay. So in that case, why do we feel like human, but why don't we feel like that energy, or why don't we get that feeling? So when I'm walking, I feel like, okay, I'm just walking because of my bones, my muscles, my organs, but why don't I feel like that energy?
So very interestingly, if I were to bring in a little bit of neuroscience here, even that feeling that we have is a bunch of hormones, neurotransmitters, all working together, and that gives us a lived experience. If you were to tweak with those neurotransmitters, which current drugs can do, you can switch off, switch on experiencing.
Correct.
Right? These are like chemical aspects, neurotransmitters, hormones. You can introduce chemistry which switches on, switches off, and thereby you would not have a certain experience, or you would have an overdose of some experience.
Yeah.
So one can play with such experiences. So when we are flesh and blood, it's we are bound by this experiencing, which is not wrong. That's why in deep spirituality, people try to go beyond such physical or sensory experience, to still the mind, to still the body, to still the prana, and thereby going beyond this sensory boundaries that we are caught up in, which is what we define as human experience. So when we step outside this boundary, then are we so much human? Where human, by human we refer to this form,
Flesh
this
blood,
name and form, right? That's where the being aspect comes. So you say human being,
right.
The being, we are mostly stuck with the human experience, and hence the being is stuck with this human form. Now, if you detach it by spiritual and religious processes that gets you beyond the boundary of being human, then you are more being, and that is spiritual. Right now, that is not there in most people's experience because they don't aspire for it. But otherwise, one can take steps in that direction, moving from this human to the being.
So when you say being, does it mean just existing, like just the whole concept of existing at the moment or something?
So it seems like a negation of the human experience that we have, and hence it seems like when we negate the human experience, which is the only experience we have now, right? We are a human being, and this is the only experience that we have now. And when we refer to the being, it seems like a negation of the human experience, and that gives leaves us with a vacuum. But that's not the idea. The vacuum is not the idea of spiritual experience. It's not like, oh, if my humanness is gone, then where am I? That would ring alarm bells. That's not the idea. The idea is to gain a perspective where the being encompasses the human experience and goes beyond it. So it is, that's called Purnatva, where it's all encompassing. It does not leave out anything. That is the nature of religious experience or spiritual experience. When we say experience of Samadhi, for example. So it does not leave out anything, but it's not a state of vacuum, or it's not a, it is not just negating human experience. Okay. Because then we are stuck with, then who am I? What's there in it for me?
Right.
It's not just negating that. So it is not a negative philosophy. It's more like a comprehensive approach,
Okay.
Which is what spirituality is.
Right. And so what is spiritual enlightenment? And I know I've read articles about, where monks have been, monks, the brain scans of monks have shown that they've been wired differently because of all these practices or meditations and all that stuff. So what is spiritual enlightenment, and how can you feel, like how does it feel different from, for someone who's not enlightened, or like what is the difference? Like, how do you, in terms of feelings and in terms of the manifest thing, how do you feel it?
One thing is sure, it feels very relaxed. So that way it is an awesome experience. Let's say we are caught up with our human experience. This is there to do. Next, there's this to do. We are caught up with our worries. There is past. There is future. The past we have had bitter experiences, good experiences, memories, and in the future we are planning. Okay, what's next for me? Uncertainties are there, and what's going to happen in the future? We are both expecting. We have hope, and we are also a little concerned. Uncertainties exist. So this is what most of us are caught up with, right? Now, what would it feel like stepping out of this? That is very enlightening. Enlightening because this experience that we are having is, let's say, for example, past or future, or we are, now, we are awake. Then we go to sleep. And it seems there is no continuity to the entire process. It seems cut off. Now, what would help us connect the dots? Where for many of us, one experience, we are moving from one experience to another, and another. And we don't see these as one continuous flow. We look at it more like random happenings. Randomly things happen. For example, randomly we were born in one home, and randomly we find people just pop out of this world. Where do they go? And what happens? Okay, their bodies are here, but what happened to them? Then they disappear. So these kinds of questions push us into that domain where we want a continuity. We want an answer. Where all these, are they just random happenings? I'm born somewhere, I grow up somewhere, I do something, I get into a career, somehow something's happen, I get married. No, these all seem like random experiences. But the whole idea of spiritual experience is to enlighten ourselves on the continuity. What is it that leads to apparently random experiences? There are these waves that we see which seem random, but what is the continuity in terms of the depth of the ocean that connects all of these waves together?
So it's more like synchronicities. It's not random, but it's
not just synchronicity, but let's say synchronous as well. Synchronicity where we start seeing continuity, but also the substratum of all of these experiences. That is enlightening. Then it is, again, we don't need to imagine ourselves as seeing, we see patterns in the clouds, we see patterns here, there, everywhere. Not in that sense, that's too exciting. It's more in terms of a deep, let's say you are in the depth, ocean depth, where the experiences that are happening, the disparate random experiences that are happening are on the surface, which is like there. You're not touched by any of that. And there is a deep settlement within you where you know that with this body gone, you're not going to go anywhere, right? You didn't come, you didn't go. You're settled. The waves might come and go, but the ocean is not going anywhere. In that sense, there is a deep settlement within you, where even definitions of what is within, what is without, that also does not apply. There is a deep settlement where you can see your human experience as like waves, and you are the depth of the ocean, which is unruffled, not touched by any of this. And hence, that's enlightening, where we are not so, caught up, and yet we are free to perform our role in society. We are free to perform whatever actions we see fit that will help this world. And hence that engenders deep values.
Okay. I think my next question is kind of connected to that. So do you think, like I've been reading about this for quite some time, but I've only found conflicting, information, but I don't have anything confirmative that, that I can buy into. So does the concept of free will exist?
So, I have been a teacher for the, better part of my career. And there, looking at students gain marks, that is a system that is very illustrative, where there is the effort put in by the students, which is free will effort. But the results that they gain out of the free will effort that they put in is not just limited to their free will effort. It is, it is in a larger context that has been defined by past experience, by people who have gone through that experience. You can connect it with larger society, and that is the context that gives them the results of their free will actions. So that is a very powerful illustration that I find very appealing. So similarly, when we talk of free will, are we talking of context-free free will? Because that does not exist. It's like, are we talking of if a student is studying in a university system, their efforts are defined only in the context of the university system or the education system. Likewise, a human action, a free-willed action is defined only in the context of you can say the society, the universe at large, because you can link it up. So understanding this, then we see again free will and the fate. Again, we can look at it as a spread spectrum. We can spread it out. And which range are we in? What is the degree of freedom that we enjoy?
Right.
That we can shift.
Right.
And that is again in a context. So it is not this versus that, fate versus free will. I would rather look at it in a spectrum. And one can actually refine the degree of freedom.
Because, we often have where we're like, okay, we're doing our best, but I don't see opportunities, just, I think for the lack of a better word, I would just say opportunities in any area of life. It just doesn't have to be career related or anything. So you're doing the best you can, you're learning, you're trying to improve yourself, and then you don't see good opportunities. And then, so sometimes you're like, okay, I tried my best, but these are the only opportunities. So I'm not happy, I'm going to take it. And then, or you do something where you have to face the consequences, but I am doing that because I was forced to do it, or I didn't have any other option to do it. Like that was the only option available. So how was it free will when you're like, you're not giving me a choice? If you ask me to choose, then I'm ready to face the consequences of my choice. But when you're just giving me one option, which is not my best option, and then you're saying you have to face the consequences, I don't see the connect there.
So if we look at it, let's if we take a very simple experience, let's say you are into a career, and there are consequences attached to your actions. Now, if we zoom in into any a space-time context of your life, then it seems like hey, I'm stuck. I have to do this because I'm I don't have a free will choice. But if we zoom out, and gain a perspective, then one starts seeing a flow where your actions now, over a period of time, they gain intensity and momentum, and they model the flow, the overall flow and the direction that gives direction to your life over a period of time, right? For that, you need to zoom out. When that zooming out is done, then one sees one's actions more in the context of free will, because then one is able to connect the dots that led to that consequence much later. May not be an immediate consequence. The immediate consequence could be a consequence that is being enjoyed because of some free will action in the past, which one is not able to connect to.
Okay.
Right? Say, for example, a person came to me and said, I suddenly had a heart attack. How can you have a sudden heart attack? It's a consequence of a life lived.
Yeah.
Right? 20 years you have been living that way, and hence now you have a heart attack. And hence you need more knowledge to be able to scan this, to zoom out. So knowledge provides that power to zoom out and see our actions in context. That gives us the sense of free will. Otherwise, we feel bound and suffocated, and that just means we are zooming in too much. We just need to zoom out, which is the area of knowledge.
Interesting. Yeah, like I've always wondered about this, and I'm like, sometimes I feel we do, but sometimes I feel like no, we don't. It's just it's an illusion. That free will is an illusion.
The debate can go on. That's the fun,
Oh yeah, definitely. I probably could have one whole session on that. Yeah, I don't want to make this about religion or anything, but for someone who feels that they are an atheist, so can you be an atheist and be spiritual, or are they mutually exclusive?
So if we were to define atheism, see, atheism, looks at being the opposite of theism. Theism is something where you have, let's say, a form of God, right? So here, I'm not using God as a bad word. For many young people, for many atheists or agnostics, God is a bad word. I'm not using God as a bad word here, okay, just to clarify. If we are open-minded, then we can just discuss this, with an open mind. So in that sense, let's say there's a God that you pray to, that you are convinced about. Then you have an opposite concept where you don't believe in a God, and hence you don't pray to that God, and so on. So that creates this theistic idea and the atheistic idea, right? So it is a question of faith or belief. Now, I would call that it's pretty open. For example, my parents, I might have faith in my parents. That does not mean you need to have faith in my parents, right? Right. You don't need to believe in my parents. My parents, they mean so much to me. Faith or belief is feeling. The way I feel for my parents, you are not forced to feel for my parents.
Correct.
And that is the whole freedom, right? I can feel for my parents just by looking at you. If I were to impose on myself that I should also not feel for my parents because you are not feeling for my parents, that would be a barren idea,
right?
Right? I can still feel for my parents, and I can still allow you the freedom of not feeling for my parents, right? You can feel for your parents. I still have the freedom of not feeling for your parents. That feel, when we bring in, that is the element of faith or belief that creates this dichotomous idea of theism versus atheism, right? So if you were to believe in science, then you also, you have feeling for science. That means, so we are looking at principles here, not just one form of God or one, a form attached to a particular cultural context. You are free to believe or disbelieve. That does not mean one needs to impose that disbelief on someone who believes.
Right.
So everyone has the freedom in that sense to be. If one works with one's emotions, whatever one can connect with, that is what becomes important to oneself. How does one use one's emotions to grow? Growing in the feeling of freedom, in the feeling of liberation. And there, if someone has faith in Bhagavan Rama or Bhagavan Krishna, nobody needs to say that is wrong or right. It is individual feeling. Now, how to use that feeling to grow in one's life, that is perfectly fine. If someone uses that, there's nothing wrong with it, I would say. That's a very useful path, because developing feelings, now a dangerous idea would be having no feelings. Then we are not human.
Right, right.
So, then there's no fun. There's not even a human life then. It's an automaton. Right. We don't want that. That's the idea of having values in a society, where there are deep feelings of mutual love and respect. That is definitely required. One needs to be anchored. Many young people now bereft of feelings because the idea of God has been removed. It's bereft of feelings. It's like the idea that, okay, I'm all these atoms or quarks, particle wave duality, but there is no scope for feelings there. That is a dangerous idea. That could lead to a world which could seem hellish, because it's bereft of feeling. The feeling of mutual love, respect, peace, harmony. All of these are to do with the theistic idea, right? So the theistic idea gives us the nature of feeling, of emotion, of a divine emotion, directing our emotions towards something positive, peaceful, expansive. And that's how the feelings have to be cultivated. So that way, the feelings also have a very important role in science.
Yeah. So are you saying that spirituality can put an end to human suffering? And if yes, how do you think science can study this?
Yeah, that's where, as we discussed, that gives us the context for this, where science as a study is one thing, but when we connect it with the human experience, then it's not science in terms of just dry intellectual knowledge, but in terms of application where human lives can be improved, the life on this planet can be improved. Everyone can have a good, fulfilling life experience. Because there are so many people who live unfulfilled life because of want of, let's say, food, because there is, they have economic barriers to access food. They could feel unfulfilled because of lack of peace, where they live in constant fear. There's fear of war, there's fear of so many kinds of fears exist. They could feel unfulfilled because of lack of proper inspiration in life, lack of proper motivation, where they don't have hope for their lives. They see they are in routine work and it's very traumatizing, where they see, how do I break free of this monotonous life? So we are talking of that feel factor. So how do we feel liberated? How do we feel free from the constraints that terrorize us, that traumatize us? And that's where science needs to be merged with spiritual values or religious values, because values can provide that feel factor. Because without that feel, our life, is it even worth it? What do we call a human life? Or what do we call life itself without that feel? That's where in the, for example, there's a powerful text in Tamil called Tirumandira. where God is defined as love. So, Anbe Shivam. So, love is God. So, that's how it's powerfully defined. And that love is what sustains all of this. Now, science, if it approaches it in this context, then it's holistic.
Right.
If it is bereft of this context of love, the ineffable, then that's going to cause a lot of trauma.
No, I think that was, yeah, I think you put that very beautifully. This brings to the last question. I probably wanted to end it on a very scientific pattern, I guess. So so if I have to say that my null hypothesis is God doesn't exist, or there is nothing like that, how would you prove that? Like, how do you disprove that? Disprove my null hypothesis. I know you would say that I don't have the need to prove it, which is probably the correct answer. But just for the sake of conversation.
Yeah. So need or otherwise, it's very interesting to take up such a hypothesis, right?
Yes. Yes.
So that's where, if we look at it, if we approach the nature of truth, if we were to look at it, because when we say God exists or does not exist, or I exist, I do not exist, I will replace God with I, okay, here. Now, even that, the nature of proof is such that it is always tending towards truth. It has not reached absolute truth. If you see the nature of scientific exploration or the nature of scientific knowledge, that's how it is oriented. It tends towards the truth, but it's not there. Otherwise, all knowledge would be done.
Yeah.
And we are not done with science. It's exciting to see all the scientific discoveries, and we are looking forward to, to all the exciting scientific discoveries that are happening and that are about to happen. So this is like more like an approximation algorithm where we from this side to that side, but they are constantly, and hence it is proven yet not proven, and proven and not proven at the same time, right?
Okay.
And neither proven nor not proven at the same time. So this is a four-pronged logic that we need to develop further as we approach it. And that is an area that scientific methodology can incorporate in domains, tending towards experience, spiritual experience. So it is not just, right now we use science, the methodology of science or the null hypothesis is more in terms of this versus that. It's binary. While here I'm proposing not a binary approach, but more like a multi-pronged approach, multi-sided approach. And that could also be a very rigorous methodology.
Yeah, so it's more like you change your research question and like than, we already have the answer. This kind of, have you read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams?
Yeah, it's very interesting.
It's very similar to that, right? So it says the answer is 42. Now go back and find out the question, like come back with a different question. So it's very similar to that.
But I'm not playing with the words. These are useful methodologies to develop, and that's where in science we use, for example, to touch experience, we use what is called a third-person approaches. While in the Indian sciences, we have used first-person approaches. In yoga, all the texts are first-person. First-person means you are dealing with your own observations and working on it. So that is also considered very valid. And there, it is not binary. It is more like a continuum.
Yeah, it's more like anecdotal, like out of personal experiences.
Not just anecdotal. Because anecdotal reduces it again to a limited data set. This is like connecting your experience in the light of the larger context of human experience, or religious experience, spiritual experience, and so on. That is how I came upon the discovery that the experience that I had, which initially I had no name for, then studying all the religious and the spiritual literature, I came upon an understanding that, okay, this can be classified as samadhi, right? So this does not negate the individual experience that I had. At the same time, it does not, it does not pitch it as this versus that.
Right.
So that is a useful methodology, to develop.
So that's all questions I had right now. So is there something that you want to, add to the audience, just to like for eliciting curiosity, or just a food for thought maybe?
See, what I would like to mention here is when we are talking of science, religion, spirituality, we are talking of a full spectrum, and that is the whole idea of life itself. If we look at life, we are not just talking of science, we are not talking of religion, we are not talking of spirituality. It's not in silos. These are one whole, and that's where, when we talk of the understanding in terms of science, that also becomes important, and the values in terms of religion and spirituality, those also become very, very important. And that way, that leads to a fulfilled human existence, a fulfilling life existence where it's purposeful. The idea of purpose itself is value. But the idea of understanding and knowledge is science. So everything is required to have a fulfilled life experience. And definitely then we are very sure that life is beautiful. Now, it's not miserable to be alive on earth. So, and that's a great life.
And how do you find that purpose? Because I think it's like a buzzword going around that, I need to find the purpose of my life, which is a valid question. I think it's very important. So how do you find that? How do you find that purpose in life? How do you know? Because each one of us will have a different purpose, right?
Generally, yeah. So that's where I've heard often repeated, follow your heart. See, that sounds vague to many people. But if I were to put it in a perspective, let's use an approximation algorithm. Okay, you do something, and then you see, okay, this, let's say at the level of ideas, you look at all your friends or in social media contacts, and you get inspired with all the stuff that is happening out there, and you want to try all of that. So one day you want to be this, another day you want to be that, and another day you want to be something else. And that leads us to the sense of the idea of purpose, right? A direction that we want, which is certain. Yes, I'm comfortable with this. So to get at a level of comfort, one definitely needs to have an exploration where one explores a few things. And there you would see that certain things are eliminated, at least not suitable at the current time.
Right.
And hence you are left with something that you can work with. So that is a good working hypothesis to have, right? A working hypothesis on life purpose, where the purpose is not defined forever, but good to go, right now.
Okay.
So why do we need to have a generalized idea of life purpose? For example, if you have a generalized idea of life purpose, then one can define one's life as I want to be loving and caring. That can be a life purpose. But that gives infinite scope for defining how you wish to achieve it. Right?
Okay.
So that can be a very beautiful life purpose. If you're looking at defining a life purpose, let's do it all inclusive, so that we have sufficient scope to move, a space to move, space to navigate, there. Otherwise, we would feel stuck and miserable, and we would have discovered a life purpose, and that would be suffocating. So that's not the idea. That's a very generalized view of things. So that's where definitely listen to your heart.
Listen to your heart. Okay. So I want to end this with on this note. So follow your heart, and I hope all of you had a good time and listening to this. I'm pretty sure you. I try to tap into the questions that everybody would have. At least people who are familiar with the nuances of spirituality. But if you have any more questions, you can feel free to write them in the comments, or I'm going to anyway add Aditi's Twitter handle and the contact information, so you can get in touch with him or the foundation with your questions. Yeah, so we have many such interesting concepts coming up in the future episodes. So yeah, stay curious, and nothing is rocket science. See you.
Namaste.